How's it going, everyone? I am Jinsula. I hope you're having a good day, and welcome to today's Pokemon Go discussion video. Okay, so we are about to get the Legendary Pokémon Regidrago in Elite Raids. It seems like the Pokemon Go community is split on whether or not this is a good thing. So, for today's video, I wanted to talk about if Elite Raids are fine being in Pokemon Go, or if Niantic should scrap them and go back to the drawing board. Right, so with that said, let's roll the intro and get right into it. Okay, let's talk about Elite Raids. So, these special raid battles are the spiritual successors to EX Raids. In case you weren't around when those raids were a thing, they were basically event-style raids that only a select few could participate in. The way that they worked was pretty complex. Anytime you completed a raid battle at a gym marked with the EX tag, your account would be placed in a lottery for that gym. If your name was drawn, you would receive an invitation to a special EX raid that would be happening at a specific date and time. These raids were where you would pick up special legendary and mythical Pokemon. Believe it or not, Pokemon like Mewtwo, Darkrai, Regigigas, and Deoxys were once considered scarce, as you would only be able to obtain them through EX raids. Rather than being able to farm them up whenever they were part of the raid rotation, you would be vastly limited to only being able to do 2 of them per week. EX raids were a huge point of controversy back in the day, as it was not available to everyone, and there were a lot of question marks on how they even worked in the first place. Players were also not happy about them being on a fixed schedule. If you were not free at the time that they were happening, you would essentially miss out on a really hard to get Pokemon. But after the world started experiencing the pandemic, and it was ill-advised to go outside, Niantic basically put a halt to all EX raids, as they usually drew a large gathering at each of them. Any Pokemon that would typically be reserved for EX raids were no longer considered rare, as they would eventually just be a part of the regular 5-star raid rotation. Fast forward to the post-pandemic era, and the concept of EX raids lives on through Elite Raids. Just like with how things were with EX raids, there were a lot of conversations regarding whether or not Elite Raids should be a thing. So let's go over the pros and cons with Elite Raids, starting with the pros. The first positive of Elite Raids that I wanted to talk about is in regards to legendary rarity and scarcity. Some would argue that this is more of a negative, but I actually prefer when legendaries and mythicals are less prevalent and abundant. Sure, it would be nice to farm up a particular legendary for perfect IVs or shinies, but there's just something really satisfying when you have a Pokemon that very few others have. This was kind of how it was with Mewtwo back when it was first released in EX raids. If you had one, it felt like you were among a small percent of the entire player base. It added value to that Pokemon, and it motivated you to show it off to your friends. Nowadays, anyone who can raid will have pretty much every legendary and mythical in their collection. It's not often you will come across a Pokemon that very few others will have. Scarcity is barely a thing anymore, and the sense of uniqueness behind most Pokemon in your collection just doesn't exist. But yeah, this could, of course, be seen as a bad thing. I'll get more into that later. Now, the other positive to Elite Raids that carried over from EX Raids is that they would create very unique experiences that you won't always find anywhere else. Specifically, these raids would feel like a small event or meetup. Since modern day raiding is mostly done remotely, it's very rare that you would ever meet other trainers in your areas. Elite Raids are a great way to bring communities together since players are forced to do them in person. Likewise, they are a great way for players to discover local groups and communities, and for those groups to increase their numbers. Plenty of core players in my local communities wouldn't be a part of those communities if it weren't for EX Raids back in the day. Those same communities grew even more once Elite Raids were introduced. Finally, the third positive that I see with Elite Raids is that they make Campfire that much more relevant. For anyone who's been following my channel for a while, you would know that I'm a big fan of Niantic Campfire. I really think this social app has a ton of potential, and if Niantic were to develop it further, it can elevate Pokemon Go. One of the things I would love to see more is some synergy between these two apps, and I really think Elite Raids are a great avenue for that. In previous Elite Raid rotations, the few of us who were on Campfire were able to utilize it in a variety of useful ways. First, I set up a few flares to indicate to others that I intended to raid certain gyms. Second, I would post various notes for others on which Elite Raids were going to be full lobbies, and which would need help. In general, I just think Elite Raids are great for building up Campfire's usage. If Niantic could roll it out to more trainers and continue development on it, then I do think it could create some great experiences with Elite Raids. Okay, now that I covered some of the positives with Elite Raids, let's now get into the problems with them. I do think Elite Raids have some inherent flaws, just based on their similarities to EX Raids, but I also think there is room for improvement, so I will try to be as constructive as possible with my criticisms. First, let's talk about the scarcity issue. I mentioned this as a positive earlier in this video, but I think it should be explored as a negative as well. Preventing every player from getting certain legendaries and mythicals because of various hoops they have to jump through creates a lot of different problems. For example, limiting the amount of a particular legendary means certain players could have strong unfair advantages in the Go Battle League. For newer players who are looking to get into PvP, this could be a pretty big deal. It also vastly limits certain players' capabilities to complete their Pokédexes. This can create immense amounts of frustration for anyone who cares about catching them all. By having certain Pokemon exclusively in Elite Raids, you are bound to have players who will not be able to collect them. If Elite Raids were like any other raids, then yes, this would obviously not be an issue. But because so many conditions have to be met in order for a player to successfully defeat them, this means there is a lot of gatekeeping to an aspect of the game that should be open to everyone. This leads me to the second issue with Elite Raids, and that is how closed they are to a vast majority of players. Simply put, these raids are extremely difficult and require a lot of trainers in order to defeat. I don't know how it's going to be for Regidrago and Regieleki, but this was the case with Hoopa Unbound. This means players who play a bit more casually, players who don't belong to robust communities, and players who live in rural areas will ultimately miss out. This was one of the major issues with EX raids. Since there was no guarantee that the lobby would be filled up to full when you got there, you never knew whether or not you would be able to successfully get the featured Pokemon. Unless you were already part of a large coordinated group, it was basically a roll of the dice if your EX raid invitation was any good. The same thing tends to happen with Elite Raids. If you see an Elite Raid egg nearby, chances are you will be the only one there when it hatches. Since Elite Raids are in-person only and can't be remoted in, the only way for you to successfully complete any of these raids would be to coordinate with other trainers in a set community. Sure, you could discover an already existing local community by attending the Elite Raid anyway. Just as much as you run the possibility of being alone at the gym, you could end up finding a group of players who are coordinating with each other. I just think the innate design of Elite Raids could be better. I mentioned Campfire as a great way for you to do that, but they could remedy this problem by having in-game indicators as well. I really think it's about time they added that showing interest button to raids. Something like that would go a long way with Elite Raids, since they require so many players in order to be completed. One more issue with Elite Raids that kind of coincides with the previous problem I just mentioned is that their design can create very toxic situations between players and communities. What do I mean by this? Well, imagine going to an Elite Raid and finding a group of players you've never seen before. You ask them if you could join them for the Elite Raid, and they deny you and go into a private group because they don't want to share the rewards for whatever god-awful reason. Well, that would be terrible for you, and it could create some unnecessary tension and awkwardness in the moment. If you think this sort of scenario is unrealistic, I have bad news for you. It actually happens all of the time. Since plenty of local communities are tight-knit groups, it's common that some of them will be very elitist or not inclusive. This isn't even a new problem. It's been happening pretty much since the game first released. Elite Raids is another avenue for it to occur, so I do think Niantic has to allow for more inclusive gameplay so that these sort of situations don't happen. So yeah, I definitely think there's room for improvements with Elite Raids. There's a lot of upsides to having them existing in Pokemon Go, but they do create a lot of problems as well. Hopefully Niantic can make those improvements, because I do think there is a lot of potential here that they haven't met yet. Anyways, that's going to be it for this video. Now, since this is a hot topic of discussion, I would love to know your thoughts on Elite Raids down below. Are you a fan of them, or do you think they shouldn't be in the game? Let me know why down below in the comments, and let's have a great discussion. And if you ended up enjoying this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe if it's your first time here, and don't forget that little bell so you can stay up to date on whenever I upload videos. And I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons on Patreon. You make this channel content possible. If you want to support my channel in any way, big or small, then be sure to check out the links in the description below. For all my patrons, they get a permanent spot on my in-game friends list, so if you want to interact with me in some way, like with remote raids, then do consider becoming a patron on my Patreon. But yeah, that's going to be it. I'm Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself, and I'll catch you all later.